Hey everybody and welcome to another month in review. So in this series I take a look at all the new to me games I played over the last month and I rank them from my least favourite all the way up to my most favourite. I have 14 new games this month and as usual the variety between these games is massive, going from the lightest of light up to the crunchiest, heaviest of Euros. Before I get started I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, Kienda.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer here in the UK, and if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code then you can get 5% off your first order. Additionally, I wanted to give a shout out to a game that's launching on Kickstarter or relaunching on Kickstarter called The Fog Escape from Paradise. So this game I actually reviewed last year after a prototype copy was provided to me. I really enjoyed it. My review is still live, so go check that one out. And I wish the publisher the best of luck with the new campaign. But let's get started on the video. At number 14, I have Recollect, which is by far the lightest game on this list. And this is pretty much a pure memory style game. And generally, memory is not my strong suit, not something I generally lean towards. However, this one did some pretty cool things. So this game, you're going to start with, I believe it's 5 of these face down tokens. You're going to have a chance to look at these tokens for a few seconds before you flip them over. And they're going to have different symbols on them, such as, like ice cream or, a bottle of wine, that kind of thing. Then all you're going to do on your turn is you're going to choose one of these tokens for your opponent or the person to, I think it's clockwise order to you, to guess what is on the reverse side of that. And if they guess it correctly, then they gain a point. And if you kind of correctly guide them to a token that they can't guess correctly, then you get the points. But every single time there's a guess, a new token goes down, which makes the game harder and harder as the game goes on. And that is basically the gist of the game. You keep going until the 10-minute timer runs out and whoever's got the most points at the end is the winner. Now, surprisingly, we had quite a good time with this one. And I played this a couple of times now. And I think maybe the reason why we did enjoy it for what it was because it's something so different to what we normally play. We're normally sitting down and playing, 2-hour Euros. This is something completely off the left field, and so it felt different and it felt fresh for that reason. But, it is what it is. If you like memory, you'll probably like it. If you don't, you don't. There was a few issues with the rules, and this is being, nitpicky, and nobody's ever going to do this, but there was no stipulation to how long you could take on your turn. So technically, according to the rules, if you got ahead in the game, you could just sit back and not do anything when it's your turn. So it was kind of broken in that regard. So maybe I missed a rule in the rule book, but from what I saw, that was the case. But, simple memory game. It was perfectly fine. Production was a little bit iffy, but I think the game is relatively affordable anyway. At number 13, I have Ankh, Gods of Egypt. So this one I wasn't really planning on playing. I turned up to a games night. We ended up dividing into 2 groups of 5, and one of the groups of 5 was a game of Ankh. So I thought, I'll give this one a go. I tried Blood Rage, I tried Rising Sun, so I may as well try and complete the trilogy. Now Ankh, I think, is probably a slight, or maybe comparable to Blood Rage in weight. But this one, it's another area majority style game, as you'd probably expect, where you're trying to have influence on these different monument types, these different regions, and if you have the most, then you're going to get a point essentially. And you're also going to get a point for controlling the most troops in that region. There's going to be fights and things where you're playing these simultaneous cards. Now I thought the combat was pretty cool actually, because there was almost a benefit for doing everything. If you wanted to kill your troops, you could do and get points for doing so, which we've seen before from this designer. And yeah, there were some quite cool things going on. I like the way that you could divide the board up and create new regions as the game went on. But generally speaking, I thought this was a bit too much of a kitchen sink style game, a bit too much going on in terms of player powers everywhere that you could invest in. It was hard to keep track of not only what you had to make sure you'll keep getting the income that you deserve and what you've invested in, but also bearing in mind what everybody else has done as well. And when you layer on top of that unique player powers from your races that you start with, that was even more difficult to remember. And one of the big no-nos for me was this merge mechanism, where at a certain point in the game, the players or the 2 players lacking behind will merge their team together and try to team up to win the game. And because our game was so tight from start to finish, I think when this happened, there were 3 players on 1 point more than the other 2 players left behind. So there's only a 1 point gap. Therefore, when they merged, it felt like it really did draw a lot of the tension out of the game, because they ended up losing all their influence on the table and pretty much having to start from scratch, even though if it had stayed as it was, they had a perfectly viable chance of winning. So that felt a little bit iffy, and I couldn't quite rack my brain over why this was a rule in the first place. So maybe you guys could fill me in. At number 12, I have Sobek, 2 players. So this is a pretty simple, almost abstract style game, as you have this board full of tiles in a big grid essentially, and all you're doing on your turn is that you are moving this Ankh piece in a certain direction which is pre-orientated from the last tile drawn. So some might say horizontally, vertically or diagonally, and that's going to show which tile you can take next. And the tiles you're going to collect in order to get set collection bonuses, because you're going to multiply the goods type by the scarabs on those goods. But I did quite like this corruption mechanism where if you chose to skip over certain tiles because you might not be interested in them, you take those tiles you skipped over as corruption. And at the end of the game, whoever had the most corruption would not get a bonus token essentially. But if one player really ran away with corruption, they could end up taking several bonus tokens, at least the other player could. Some quite cool things here. I think mechanically it worked well. You know, a little bit too abstract strategy for my style of gameplay. I tend not to like these kind of grid movement style games. But this one was certainly up there with the better ones of them. It looks very nice and it produced very well. But one big thing for me that was a big detriment, in my opinion, of the game was this idea of drawing these Debon tokens from the bag, because sometimes you could trade these tokens, these tiles you collected in, to draw a Debon tokens, which would be these tokens that would range from 3 points up to 9 points, and that is purely done on a lucky dip. So sometimes you could get 3 points for doing so, sometimes you could get 9 points, and as you could probably tell, if that goes in your favour or goes against you, that is a big point swing which could definitely determine the winner of the game. So that was a bit of a bitter pill for me to swallow, but the rest of it, objectively, I thought it was good. If you like these style of games and you like these Cathala special powers and things, I think this one could be up your alley. At number 11, I have Demeter. So Demeter is a pretty involved flip and right style game, as you have 5 decks of cards, all corresponding to a different colour. Then all you're doing on your turn is you're selecting one of these cards and then ticking off this row of cards matching that on your player sheet. And you can only ever draw or use the same type of card 4 times. But whenever you use it, you get a bonus ability that gets stronger and stronger as you go on. And what you're trying to do with these cards is you're trying to colour in these different dinosaur types. And if you colour them in, you can get bonus points based on another thing that you invest in. So you can kind of get these research centres that you can tick off. And it's all that kind of traditional multipliers and bonuses that you would expect from a flip and right style game. It was slightly heavier than most of them that I usually play and tend to enjoy, but it works well. There's some good strategy here, as you can get some cool multipliers and aim towards the end game scoring criteria. And one of the things I did actually like about this game quite a lot was the fact that you actually had to invest in these end game points rather than just scoring them automatically. So, like for example, if you ended up unlocking a bunch of dinosaurs and then researching them fully, that would give you the the ability to score a certain end game goal. Or you can go up this kind of science research track, and if you reach certain kind of pinnacles on it, then you can unlock that end game bonus. So I do generally like it when games embed that kind of that synergizing of the different parts of the game. But other than that, it was pretty standard fare, albeit pretty solid. At number 10, I have Ganymede. So Ganymede is a pretty simple engine building style game, as you're drafting cards and tiles to constantly improve your little engine. And the idea is that you're trying to collect these meeples of different colours, shift them from planet to planet, and eventually land them on these objective cards. And if you ever land, I believe it's 4 or 1 of each of the different colours on a planet, you'll score that objective card, or 3 of the same type, I believe. And if you do that, you're going to take that objective card, put it in your scoring pile, which will score based on different things you do throughout the game. But additionally, you'll draw a new objective card and put it out there. And it's going to be the first person who completes 4 of these objective cards will trigger the end game. But one of the things I did like about this game was not only did it have this tension of trying to get things done quickly, you could actually still do quite well if you do kind of take your time and cater your strategy more towards the objective cards rather than just rushing the finish. So I do tend to like that when rushing isn't the only strategy to really go for, or the viable option. But the rest of it was very simple. You'll be drawing these cards, adding them onto your little player board. The more of the same card's colour that you collect, you get to take multiple bonus actions. But additionally, if you get all the different card types, then you can just complete a card for free. So you are kind of incentivized not only to get the same card type, but to also diversify. But yeah, definitely a half a step above something like Splendor. Maybe if you're fatigued with a game like that, this would be a good one to go for. Another solid design that I can't really criticise. I'm not going to lie, it doesn't terribly excite me, but it's good for what it is. And again, a gateway plus style game with some kind of crunchiness to sink your teeth into. At number 9, I have Floriferous. So this is a very simple drafting and set collection game where you're trying to collect these different flower types and these different kind of bugs and insects, but also collect the cards that are going to score with them. So I like the drafting system in this game. As you build up these columns of cards, then in player order, you are going to move on to the next column of cards and select one of them, and everybody's going to follow suit. However, if you go kind of dive deeper on that row of cards or column of cards, then you're going to go last in the next turn. And these cards are going to be simple things such as just the cards of the flower types, some of which are going to have these insects on as well, which is going to be another kind of objective to aim towards. But also you've got these cards that are actually going to score you points in the first place. And some of them are going to be based on kind of bouquets of flowers you can build, or some of them are based on flower types or insect types and that kind of thing. And there's also some public objectives as well, where you want to be hitting them as early as possible because you can get more points for doing so. Very succinct and quick game. All you're going to do is going to play, I think it's 5 columns and go 5 back. And that's pretty much the whole game. So it's nice and snappy and quick. It might even be back again, but it's whatever it is. It plays in about 20 minutes. Very breezy, very kind of charming and pleasant. And it's one of those games where I can't really ever see myself rejecting a game of this because it is so nice. But alternatively, is it going to really, again, excite me? Is it going to draw me back in, at least make me request to play it, often? That's probably not going to be the case because it is very passive. Okay, so let's get into the top 8 games, and this is where my recommendations are going to begin. So at number 8, I have A Universal Truth, which is a game that I believe is only available on Game Crafter at the moment. But this is a multi-use card style game as you're racing to complete all the needs of this love interest. So you're going to need to get a certain number of these hearts, you're going to need to get a certain amount of female and male friends, a certain amount of these kind of skills, and also a certain amount of money. And the way you collect these cards is based on this rondelle, where I think it's like going to have 10 cards or so in a big wheel, and you're going to roll a big bunch of dice, and then you're going to draft one of those dice, and that's going to show how many spaces around this rondelle you can move with your player pawn. And depending on the card you land on, that's the one you're going to collect and add it into your hand. Then in following rounds, you can play those cards in a bunch of different ways, again, adding them to any side of that character to try and race towards getting all their needs completed. And if you are the first person to do it, you are going to win. But I did like that idea of, what cards do I need? Who's got the most money on them? What's the best thing for me to draft now? Is this next dice going to be there in the pool for my next draft so I can get to this next card that I want? And there's even these unique abilities that you can use by playing these cards from your hand and manipulating the board state into your favour. And something I really did like about this game was the ability to tinker the game or tweak the game to your level of complexity. So you can play a real basic kind of little tableau builder, or you can start embedding in all these tighter and tighter restrictions to make that card play more difficult and that hand management more difficult to think through. At number 7, I have Pergamon by Stefan Dora. So this is a game I've been really wanting to play for a long time. It's been out of print, but Eagle Griffin did reprint the game, so I've managed to get this one to the table at last. And I'm really glad I did because I enjoyed this one a lot. So this is a pretty simple set collection style game, but there is some cool elements to this game that I haven't seen before in other designs. And I suppose the main thing about this game is the way that you acquire money, because each round is going to be this deck of cards. You're going to reveal 2 of these cards, or at least draw 2 of them. And on the back of those cards, it's going to have one of 2 different symbols. You're going to have a money bag or a kind of chest. And what that means is that on the reverse side of the chest card is going to be a certain amount of coins. I think it's ranging between, say, 4 and 8. And on the money bag, it's going to be anywhere between like 1 and 5, something like that. I could be wrong on the numbers, but you get the gist. And in player order, you are going to be placing your, basically, meeple on this track, which means that if you go closer towards the cards, you're going to get a lower amount of money, but you are going to get the first dibs on that money. But if you go later, you could end up acquiring a lot more money, but bearing in mind that the money from that pool is going to get depleted for each player before you. So it's got this kind of push your luck system. So I love that idea, and when is the right time to take the gamble. And alternatively, on top of all that, the order in which you place these meeples is important because it's going to show the different kind of sites that you can draft from, because there's going to be 5 different rows of these tiles that you can collect. Each of them gets more expensive, but the more expensive ones are going to be worth more points when it comes to curating these items. So each of these tiles that you collect have 2 different artifacts on them, and they chain together by connecting to each other. And then if you want to, you can exhibit them in the museum, which is how you're going to get points. But each time you get points, you're going to put them on this scale and almost kick everybody down below you, kind of reducing the points they're going to get when it comes to the point scoring rounds. That's pretty much the whole gist of the game. A very tight bunch of mechanisms that come together wonderfully, very accessible, again, different enough to kind of, to stand out from the crowd. At number 6, I have Sealand. So this is another game that is kind of faded into obscurity over the years, but it's a very solid design. A little tile placement, tile drafter style game. As you're taking these tiles of different types, you've got like ones with flowers on them, which score you points, and you've also got the ones that let you establish these windmills on the board. And the idea is that you want to be surrounding your windmills with different types of flowers to score the points on them. However, because these tiles are hexes, you can start slotting them into different places and leeching of other players' placements and things like that. And the one thing I really loved about this game was the way the money works, because you are really tied arm to arm really with what the other players are doing, because it's not like in this game you can stockpile money and save. You are always have money in accordance to what the other players have. Because in this game you have like I think it's like 5 or 6 coins which go on this wheel system, and whoever is at the back is where the last coin's going to be. But when the person at the back starts spending money and leaving coins behind them, it's going to start kind of leading the path for the people in the front to start spending money again. So what that means is that if you've got someone at the back who's never spending money, the people at the front are going to have no money to spend. So I love that level of interaction, and although it probably sounds more complicated than what I've explained it, it was so simple and it's very clever. But the tile placement part of the game is fun. As you're trying to get the right player and slot it in, you need to get some variety, otherwise you're not going to score any points. And there's some very clever design choices here, where not only can you try and sneak into spots and get a quick grab of points, but you're also rewarded for kind of investing in big points grabs, because if you ever score a big chunk of points, you mark it on this score track. And at the end of the game, whoever scored the most points in an individual placement will get more points at the end of the game. So I love that, and it's a great way of balancing out the 2 different approaches to the game. But the rest of it feels kind of timeless. It's dated very well in my opinion, and I thought this is a lovely game. At number 5, I have Rapido. So Rapido is a re-implementation of a classic Reiner Knizia dice game called Escape. This is a pure dice chucker, and I believe it was inspired by the classic game Can't Stop. But this one, you are just rolling a pair of dice, which is going to have, I think it's numbered from 0, which is kind of signified by an X, up to 7 on one of them, and I believe the other one is X up to 6. And what you're going to do is you're going to roll these dice and try to get the highest number as you possibly can, essentially. And once you're happy with your number, you can lock it in on this chart, meaning that if it gets back round to your turn, you're going to move up a number of steps on this track equal to where you are on that chart. And it's going to be a race to get right to the top of all these steps. However, this game adds in some very cool player interaction, as if somebody is really running away from it, you can start placing your dice on a step below that person to try and kick them off to make sure they're not going anywhere on their turn. But on top of all that, if you ever roll an X on anything but your first roll, then you're going to go bust and fall down the steps. But on top of all that, if you end up rolling a pair, either like ones, a pair of ones, a pair of twos, or a pair of threes, you will instantly move up those steps. And those 3 things mixed together just just make up a wonderful game. I mean, extremely fun. The fun factor on this game is off the charts. And to be honest, if I was purely basing it on the fun experiences I've had, this one might even be a number 1. I introduced this one to my dad, who very rarely plays any games, and he had a wonderful time, which doesn't mean anything to you guys, but to me, it's a big statement for this game. It's quick, it's fun, it's addictive, and definitely up there with one of Kenich's best dice games. I'm absolutely infatuated with this game. I think it is brilliant. At number 4, I have Golem, which is certainly a step above something like Rapido in terms of its complexity. So this is a relatively involved crunchy Euro by Simone Luciani, who is one of my favourite designers ever. And this game actually has a lot of shared DNA with another Luciani co-design called Grand Austria Hotel, because the drafting system in this game is very similar. So in Grand Austria Hotel, you'd roll a cluster of dice and allocate them to different actions based on the pip values. This one does the same thing, but with marbles. So you're going to drop a bunch of marbles in this synagogue structure, and wherever they filter through is going to line up with a certain action. And the more marbles lining up to that action means you're going to take a stronger version of it. But of course, the ones with the fewer marbles on there means that you might want to get there quicker because there's not so many options available. But you also have to be careful of the colour of these marbles, because they're going to correspond to these students on the main board. And these students, you want to be running through these streets, and they come in 3 different colours. And they're going to correspond to these golems that you can build, which you are going to be using to take quite powerful actions, I suppose. But these are always going to move kind of passively, so you always need to make sure you're moving your students to keep up with them. Otherwise, you're going to be spending knowledge tokens, which is, you know, a finite resource. And if you can't control them after that, then you're going to sacrifice victory points, which is a big no-no, especially because this game is so tight. Very little margin for error. It's only 4 rounds, I believe. And each of those 4 rounds, you're going to draft 2 marbles and take a worker placement spot. So yeah, little margin for error, as I said, a ton of scope to upgrade your player board, different strategies you can go down, different paths. And I did like the ability to combo things together. Has all the hallmarks of a classic Luciani game, I suppose. So I've only played this game once, so this is definitely a first impressions review, I suppose. And I suppose one of the biggest things that I didn't like about the game was that randomising element of the synagogue. I don't think it worked as well as the marbles did, and I think a big part of that is because of the physical component of the synagogue. It just didn't divide them as much as I would have liked, whereas the dice, you can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be random. But I can see why they try to differentiate it from the other games. Okay, so let's get into the top 3, and these 3 games are going to be breaking into my top 100. So at number 3, I have Ankh 2. So this is a Mac-Gertz war game / Euro game hybrid, as you are going on a big conquest, trying to conquer the world, get resources, make more troops, all with the aim of trying to fulfill these objective cards. So these objective cards are going to be things such as have sets of 5 cities under your control on the board. So when you get 5, when you get 10, when you get 15, you're going to get one of these cards. Some of them might be, say, like control the seas or erect these temples. And these temples are going to be great because they increase your income when it comes to collecting resources. And it also means that you can deploy more troops on these regions. And on top of that, they are inviting for other players, for people to come in and attack them, because another objective is to try and destroy temples. So I like the way that all these different objectives kind of merge together. You could really focus on building, or you could be a bit more of a warmongering style nation and try to conquer other regions. But I loved the way this game was pretty involved, but it all boiled down to that classic Mac-Gertz rondel, where 3 of the spots are just to produce the resources, 1 is to move your troops, I think 1 is to move your boats, and then you can also invest in these knowledge abilities, which increases your nation's ability to do things such as move faster, or increase your defenses, or to convert resources into other resources. What a wonderfully streamlined war game. Very dry, especially when it comes to the combat, as it's a very deterministic combat, as 1 troop will cancel out the other. No dice rolling, no randomising, nothing like that. So if you do like meticulously mapping things out, then this is certainly a good one, and the dice are not going to work against you. But yeah, I did like pretty much everything about it. It's certainly not the kind of game that I'm always in the mood to play, because I need to be in the right headspace to play something as confrontational as this. But if I am wanting to play something more interactive and more, again, in your face, then Ankh is certainly going to be an option, because it is so easy to explain, but has a ton of depth. Lots of layers here and different paths you can go down. Okay, so let's get into the top 2 games here, and there's actually only 1 ranks different between the 2. So, depending on which way the wind blows, it could have been any order, because these 2 games were that close. But at number 2, I have Scout. So Scout is a game that's getting quite a lot of buzz recently after being nominated, and it might have even won the Spiel des Jahres this year. But this is a card game. It's a ladder climbing game. As you're going to have a hand of cards, but these cards in your hand are going to be in a fixed order. So you're never going to reshuffle them or reorder them. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to play a hand onto the table. And then every player following you is going to have to try and beat that. And they're going to be kind of your traditional, I suppose almost like a poker hand, where you're trying to get straights, or then you're trying to get pairs, or triples and so on. But each time you're trying to build on the last one, and each time you better the previous hand, you're going to collect the previous hand into your scoring pile. However, a second option you can do is to take one of the cards from the current one on display and add it into your hand in any orientation you would have liked. So it means that you can start crafting the perfect hand of cards or arrangement of cards into your hand. And I also love this level of hand management of, I want to play this card now, so it brings these two cards together, meaning that I've got my 2 8s together, and if I draft another 8, I've got 3 8s in a row, which means I've got a pretty strong bunch of cards here, which nobody might be able to beat. And you're just going to keep taking these cards until somebody has shed all their cards in their hand, or until nobody can better the hand of cards in the centre of the table. And then whoever's got cards remaining in their hand is going to end up losing points for them. Very simple rule set, flows beautifully, nice and quick, great hand management, big kind of tension as you want to be relatively quick to get these cards down, so not to give your opponent too much opportunity to build a better hand, but not want to go too early, because if they trump you need to have something in your hand to counteract that. And I think people will still be talking about this one in a few years, because it does feel like a classic card game, and we've had an absolute blast playing this one this month. And finally, the best game I've played this month is Acropolis. So Acropolis is actually amongst the lighter games on this list. Very simple gateway level tile placement game, but there is a lot of depth here, some cool decisions that have to be made as you are drafting these tiles in. You can take the first one for free, but everyone after that you're going to have to pay a stone for to jump the queue to draft it onto your player board. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build out your city, and these tiles are going to have different kind of colours on them. So you've got like the blue tiles, which means that you want to be connecting them all together to build a big residential area. You've got these temples, which want to be surrounded by other tiles. You've got these kind of red ones, which want to be on the border of your city. You've got these yellow ones which want to be in isolation. So you're constantly trying to map things out carefully, trying to abide by all those restrictions as much as possible. But you also need to be collecting these star symbols, because those star symbols are going to be multiplied by the scoring criteria, much like a game like King Domino. The scoring system is pretty much identical. But this game has literally another layer to it, as when you draft tiles in the future, you can start laying on top of previously placed tiles to increase the multipliers, and also to collect more stone to give you more freedom and flexibility to get the tiles that you really want. This game plays in around 25 minutes, which in my opinion is an outstanding return on investment in terms of the time it takes. It's fast, it's fun, it's just a brilliant game, to be honest, and the more I play it, the more I like it, and yeah, very, very impressed. And this one being completely streamlined, there's no rules that don't need to be there. And there's even 2 different modes of the games that you can play, where you could start adding a bit more complex restrictions on the different colour types. But to be honest, I think that the base game alone and the basic rules are more than enough to get enjoyment from time and time again. So there we have it. Those are another 14 games. A really good month this month, and some of these games were so hard to divide up because as you can see in the rankings, they are very close to each other, and this is a really good batch, one of the best batches of games I've had in many months, if not of all time. So yeah, very good month of gaming for me in August. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other content too. Also be sure to check out the show's sponsor, kienda.co.uk. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.